Welcome back to Design Discord. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Gerasimoff.
And I'm Fernando Mastrangelo. And guys, today we have such a special guest, Rebecca Goldberg from Dada Goldberg, who is widely considered the best PR firm in all of New York right now, especially for design and all things design. And my former PR agent, and we'll get into that a little bit, but she really helped kick off my career. So we have a very special bond. We've known each other for 10 years. We've been through the ringer together. And so, Rebecca, welcome to Design Discord.
So happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm often behind the scenes, so not often on camera.
That's
Actually,
very
Rebecca, I
true.
have a first question for you. Fernando just introduced you as Dada Goldberg as a PR firm, but I know that you guys just kind of had a big relaunch these last few days and had kind of a merger, came together with a social media company. So would you introduce Dada Goldberg as a PR agency, or kind of how would you describe what the company is doing these days or in this next evolution?
It's a great question. I think that classically we are seen as PR, and I think that that's really the backbone of everything that we do. But we do look at communications advisory more broadly now. And we've started to think about how someone appears everywhere, all at once, ideally. How you're seeing them online, how you're seeing them in person, how it's being memorialized in the press. And I think that it's really important to have a holistic view on any brand or any talent. And so, the organic nature of our business has brought us into these other fields where if, again, it being all connected, if you do a story and then it appears on Instagram, and then what does that Instagram look like? Is it sticky? And so we have kind of threaded all of this together over time. It wasn't an overnight thing. We also did have a digital team. We have an amazing team that we had been running for about 5 years with a creative director, Eleanor Amari, and many other talents. But with the addition of Alex and the expansion of that team, we now have more minds, and we're able to tackle bigger projects. We're working with a very large destination in New York, and that enabled our growth this year. And so there was a real practical reason for the expansion, and he felt very like-minded, and that was kind of how it all came together.
So before we go deep into all the questions we have for you, give us a little bit of your history, a little bit of the history of Dada Goldberg. You guys have been around for quite some time, just so that people understand who we're talking to exactly.
Yeah. We started more than 10 years ago. Ironically, I'm sitting here in WSA, and when Daphne and I met, we were in the building right next door.
Mhm.
Um, I was not super happy there, I guess I can say all this time later. And it's really a very full circle moment to be here and to have kind of vindication in this space. So, also when we toured this, I was like, is this a good sign or a bad sign? It's proven to be a good sign because we really like this building, and when we really love having our team together under one roof. And it's been fantastic, but we have been doing it for a while. We grew up in traditional public relations. The idea that you call someone is still something that we really care about. Thinking about the positioning, thinking about the language that you're using, was in our DNA from day one. And, Daphne and I, we started this very sincerely for a love of design. Her background was, she had parents that were in arts and architecture. I just felt that I was a creative person and wanted to be in the field in, all the ways that design touches life. And so when we decided to do this thing together, it was based on a sort of a sisterhood of having a like-mindedness, where we felt like we wanted to bring a lot of care and attention to the work that we had. And, I think that what we picked up on was that the field was transitioning. At this point, when we first met, it was 2009. So
Mhm.
that was the early days of social media. I was always very interested in social media. I was myself a content person. I came from an editorial background. I think a lot about writing and how it makes someone feel, and the way imagery makes people feel. And, all of it to me is very connected. And that's where this origin of PR and social being very threaded together kind of makes sense in my world because that was my aspiration from the beginning. But then along the way, we met the people that made that make sense, because it does take a village, in my opinion. And so we started from the floor, really from the floor. Nothing was handed to us any step of the way. And we had to, kind of build it up brick by brick. And, we started in the design trade. And so our origin was always thinking about a champion, thinking about the craft, thinking about why something was made the way it was, making it look visually different, visually compelling. And from that very pure place, that DNA actually applies to many things. And we've learned that it applies to other related industries, but it's been kind of from one connection to another where, we would meet someone and then they would introduce us to another person, or eventually our work started to get observed and it became something that was larger than us. Really the change was during COVID when we started to grow. And I think, our growth is something that I'm quite proud of because I think that it really shows a scale and it shows a wider spectrum of thought. And I don't believe that you can look at anything in a vacuum and have it be really complete. I believe you have to see the whole world as it is, as a moving thing. And I consider the entire world. I even look outward to think about where are we going as a society? How does this fit in? How does this resonate with the time? That I find to be fascinating. And so we have really enjoyed kind of this bigger picture element, but the growth of it was slow. And we took a lot of pride in each and every project. And of course, it's not lost on me. We are here together because working with you was such a turning point for me personally. And I know I've told you this, but when I first met you and I was excited about the work and the range and just the provocation of thought that came with it, that was the first time I ever did a proposal that I was really excited about. And, I was like, here's material. Here, you can really think about the culture of a thing, of a time, of a person. How does that speak to the world? How does the world speak back? Where does it belong? How do you time things? And it's been really a joy to be able to then apply that. And everything that we learn, every project that we take on, it always comes back and it becomes bigger and better.
Do you feel like you said that you really started to grow during COVID. I would have thought that a lot of firms, during that time weren't growing as much. I found that kind of an interesting comment because, like, how did PR turn up during that time, or what was the thing? Because most people were, not showing as much. There wasn't any events going on. A lot of things were, kind of turning inward. So how did the firm actually grow or start to grow during that time?
There was many reasons. Ironically, we actually started to get ready for that in 2019, and we feel like that was an advantage. I had a maternity leave plan for February 2020. And so we got ready to go digital at that point, the way that we spoke to each other, the way that we met. We had no idea that would then be forced upon everybody else. Also, in 2019, we started to work a little bit more in development. We started to get our first hotel project. We started a little bit of a widening. Of course, we were working then back in 2019 with Athena Calderon, who we all know and love. And so we were starting to kind of challenge ourselves, and I think also challenge what the norms of the field were. And, so we felt really ready. And then, during COVID, of course, we were all just sort of like waiting and wondering what was happening. And then because I do have a journalist DNA, I would just call people a lot. Like, hey, what do you think? What's happening? What do you think is interesting? And I needed that. I feel that I need to be connected. I'm like a radio antenna, and I need to be connected like intuitively. And I can't just kind of like not pay attention or not communicate with other people that are, don't feel as engaged. And so, I think that there was elements of that. I think, we had put the time in, put the work in, and then by the time there were waves of return, we were ready. We had our first wave was e-commerce that started coming to us. Residential interior designers really like grew themselves in that phase, and so we grew alongside them. We were also working on a project at that time where Eva Chen's home was part of the mix with one of our designers. And so I think that we were always right there to take advantage of the opportunities and also to really maximize them. And I think to this day that we have become recognized by people that are ambitious and creative as like, if you want to be understood and if you want to be met where you are and then have that be amplified, then
Hmm.
we really understand what it's supposed to look like. And I think that that's what we've been able to prove. And so it has attracted, entrepreneurial minded people, creative people. And so it's just been sort of like from one to the next ever since. But we're also really careful about that universe and that ecosystem to make sure that the companies make sense together, it's
Hmm.
additive, and that our internal and external culture is as strong as it can possibly be. And so we're also, as we're growing, we spend a lot of time and attention with the people in our team. And I think people would be shocked by how much depth of involvement there is with all of the partners and the way that we kind of feed off of all of the intelligence that we
Hmm.
gain and use it to give better advice.
Mm.
Well,
You remember, friend, though, in our conversation with Julia, and I mentioned
hmm
this to Rebecca when we met last week too. Julia said something like, when the fairs closed, people turned to PR as another way of getting their
hmm
work out there, and maybe that was a little bit more specific to the object maker side of things rather than interior designers. But I'm also assuming,
yeah.
obviously, COVID was like a huge boom for interior design as well. So I think that was kind of an interesting moment that Julia mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think we saw a lot of people start to communicate differently because they had to and because they could. I think, what people don't talk about, but what I saw was that the models were ready to be broken by the time we got to 2020. It was starting to get a little similar, both in habit and in terms of where people were appearing. And I think that some level of that is healthy. I'm a big believer in break it before it's broken.
Has some of that remained? And can you talk like give us a little bit of an example of what that meant, or like an example of what that is that changed
Yeah.
that has remained maybe.
Well, I think that at that point in time, there was so many installations and, I think that we were ready for there to be another thing. And
Okay.
there was that void that happened where the events went away. And it made people have to focus on what they were putting out into the world, what they were saying, rather than the sort of scale of creating something and then just capturing people with how much they spent on it. And I actually think that it makes the content better. I think there's been a reflection, and we've seen a lot of the power in business change over the last couple of years in terms of the companies that were large before COVID. Many of them, I found that they had a harder time kind of reemerging into the
Mm.
market, and at least in design, not necessarily in other fields. But I think that it created an opportunity for more types of businesses to come in. Um, and definitely the photography, the way people are presenting through graphics, the way maybe they're even talking to camera now, and all of this, it felt like it
Mm.
was right for the moment. And to me, that feels like you know, a ripe opportunity for someone who has like a new point of view that would otherwise be going up against the behemoths to come in and sort of do something a little bit differently.
So, our audience, primary audience for this podcast is sort of the younger, up and coming, furniture maker, designer. Um, and I feel like Fernando and I often get asked the question, like, when you are a young studio, at what point does it start to make sense to invest in PR? And I
Hmm.
kind of wanted to throw that question to you, and what would you say to someone who's kind of just starting off or like a few years into their career?
It's a great question. It varies a lot. I think that if it also depends what you're trying to do. The bottom line answer for anyone is to actually go and read and make relationships and understand what it's supposed to look like in general, because then even if you're working with someone, it becomes more of a partnership and it's amplified. I think it's hard for what we do when there's even too much reliance exclusively on the PR connections. I think that's a little bit of a myth.
Mm.
It has to be the journalists or whoever it is has to connect with the mind of the artist, the maker, the brand, the talent. It has to be really genuine there. And I would encourage anyone that if you're that shy that you don't want to know who those people are that kind of run the sphere of influence, then you will also have a harder time defining your point of view, doing well in interviews, and even like understanding deeply how and when you should be putting your own investment into the timing and the creation of different moments. And what we do is that we give excellent advice and we help it make sense, and we have a team that we apply to it, and we can put volume and muscle and a lot of strategy, but it has to be sort of an alliance of mindset.
Well, let's say, okay, people are out of school 3-4 years. They've started to develop a collection. They don't have a huge amount of traction with sales, but they have some sales. They're steady enough, but maybe not enough to start affording PR. Would you say that should they go ahead and invest in trade fairs? Like, what's the order? Like, should they try to get a gallery, a showroom? Should they focus on that, or should they say, look, I have a really good collection. I just need visibility somehow, and the trade fairs are not really where I want to be, and maybe they're not getting showrooms just yet. Like, at what point do they start to say, like, I need brand recognition, I need visibility on me as an artist or designer? Like, when should they make that? When is it that they should try to do that?
Yeah, I do. I
Like, how
think
much material do they need to come to you with? Like, before you're like, I don't think you're ready. I think you need
right.
whatever, something like this. Yeah.
Well, it can vary. It's actually more clear cut with interior designers because we would say there, for example, that you should have 5 to 7 projects. And
Okay.
that we find to be a magic number because your point of view is established. You ideally have the budget to photograph with someone who's going to do a good job. We then have the ability to pivot back and forth between outlets and thinking about where it lands. From a maker or brand point of view, there is some complexity because you also want to make sure that the prototypes have to look good. You'd also need to have, I think, even a certain amount of money to make the prototypes look good, or to do anything. So then, there really are a lot of variables in terms of what you invest in first and how you're kind of timing that entrance to the market. But ideally, they will, first of all, put the money in photography, like do that before all else. I would say it would be better showing somewhere than not doing anything. And I also am a believer in, either like a group show or say a show like Collectible or another place where you're able to have kind of like that first to market feeling. I think do that ahead of doing PR if you have to choose. Because you do need to be able to raise the capital to even have the PR. So there is a little bit of
Right.
like a order of operation going on there.
So, like, if someone was trying to launch their first collection at Collectible, let's say, let's say they're starting with 5 to 7 pieces or something like that, is that a good time to start PR? Is that, if
Yeah.
you're starting at a fair, let's say, and you have, you want to launch your first collection?
Yeah, you want it to feel as complete as possible if you're going to put the money in, because we do work with brands of different ages and sizes and scales, but there has to be enough photography and enough definition for it to even make sense. And then, the best part about fairs, honestly, is that there's an inherent news cycle that's baked within.
Exactly.
And you're already getting, the ease of attention there. You're already getting people walking through. So you don't have to invent it from square one. But then I think what you see most people do is that they will try to align with something larger than themselves. And then oftentimes they will go and they'll build their own brand independently. They'll build their own showroom or storefront or whatever the case may be. And I do think that is more advantageous longer term, even though it's a much larger investment. You then own the universe of your brand, the way it feels, the way people are experiencing it. And I think what people realize is that even creating a photo shoot and doing it properly is so expensive that if you're going to do that, you might as well put it in a place that you can use twice. You might as well then do it in a place where you can have a party, you can bring people into it. And so like some of these investments make sense at a certain threshold when, you can kind of capture the bigger picture.
I think also, just for the sake of like financial transparency, let's say, how much would you say a young designer, let's say with kind of an entry level, maybe like a younger PR firm, how much could they expect to pay? Do you think like either, on a, monthly retainer or like on a per project basis? And do you have like any recommendation of, the value maybe that comes along with saying, okay, I'm going to invest for like 12 months of PR and see where that goes versus working on a, on a per project basis?
Yeah, the per project basis is always hard, I will say. You can be very crafty with it, but you really are better off working on a retainer. I would think that most, including an estimate from my peers, most times you could expect to spend at least $5,000 a month. Obviously there's always some flexibility with different scenarios, but have that number in your head. And then also you really do have to budget for the photographs and make sure that you're working with someone who's going to get you published, because if you don't hire the right photographer, then the whole exercise is a little bit flawed.
Mm-hmm. And then, so let's say, okay, a designer, has saved up, has that, $5,000 they've set aside for, $60,000 for a year. On a like monthly basis, what should they be expecting from their PR firm? Is it, a weekly meeting, a certain, kind of, I actually don't even know what happens on the other side and what people should expect to receive for that amount of investment.
Yeah. Well, I can't speak for everybody, but what we do is we start with a proposal, and our proposals are very lengthy. They're actually pretty robust. So you would get a very good sense of whether or not we get you and you get us from the beginning. Because we feel like, there's a lot of things that we like to look at and take on, and we get really excited by the depth. And so, for in the course of that process, you would then figure out the planning, and it would be written into the proposal. It's like, okay, are we launching for a show, for example? Then at least 3, if not 6 months before that, we have to start working where we're getting the photography, we're getting the positioning, we're setting up meetings. You should be doing one-on-ones with people. You should be really kind of refining the story, meeting the right media so that the story lands on the day of the thing, which we could use, say, a fair as this example. And then people know about you before you get there. Because I think that's also where people try to shortcut, is that they start too late. And then they try to just show up and be like, okay, we put all this energy into being here. Now what? But that work really has to go much, there's much more runway for that. And I think that the most important moment of launching something is well before launching something. By the time you launch, the news is out and it's over, and which is the very sad reality of the business that we're in. But that's the way people receive the information. So you'll be standing at a fair and someone will be asking you what's next. That's just the way it goes. And also, I think that though, as a person that believes so much in themselves, they're investing in this, they're putting themselves out there, they believe they don't want to work for another company, they think this is their path, they have a vision that needs to be in the world, uncompromised. You do have to also kind of know what's next. Like, what is the point of all of this? And I think about that a lot in terms of what is the why, what are we saying? And, any messaging that we put together, I wanted to really be like, where are we in the narrative? Where are we in the arc of this person's life, or this company's life? And what are they known for? What kind of innovation are they bringing out in the world? And so I think that the longer term relationship, and I think the preparation helps with that. And then, it's ideally what we do from that point forward is create a whole calendar where it's like, okay, we're looking outward. In the long line of this business, you're going to do something in, let's say, September in New York. Then, okay, do we go to LA? Do we go to Miami? Do we go to London? Like, where else is this appearing? How can it happen in a reasonable succession so that it feels like it's logical and things are not happening too closely together or too far apart. And, in all of that planning phase, we kind of loosely agree to what that looks like in the beginning. And then we keep up with a meeting at least every other week or so. There's communication obviously in between, but we're working toward those goals in kind of seasonal increments, if you will, early half of the year, second half of the year. And, we feel like we're always advancing toward a vision that's shared between parties. And then if, the best part about that is when it does start to take on a life of its own, and people tell us or our clients like, oh my God, they're blowing up, or I'm seeing them everywhere, and they feel that emotional connection to it because they feel like they're going along for the ride, and they feel like they understand the mission of the people that we're working with.
Yeah, when we started, I always had things stacked for the year. So we had a very full calendar, which, partially like when you're getting started, it's not that easy to have all of those things stacked. It was like, we're doing this, then we're going to do Salone, then we're going to come back and do Design Week, and then we're going to do, IGC or whatever. It was always stacked with things that, and, eventually at different stages in your career, you end up saying, well, am I going to continue being on the PR cycle, which continues to push
Mm-hmm.
your company and you as an owner to constantly be, doing more and more stuff, which, I think when you're building, I think is like, it's crucial, like you gotta be ready to get on the ride, especially if you want to develop that narrative, you know, in the public. Um, but it also comes with knowing that you have to be able to perform and keep up with that cycle, which can be tough. I reached a point where I think, we had worked so much on so many events, so in succession, that eventually I was like, damn, like, okay, like, I need to take a breather. But I think that so people need to make sure that if they're going to get on the PR ride, one, you got to be prepared to pay and basically have it as your employee, as an employee. You have to think of it as
Mm-hmm.
like an employee who you're like, okay, this is my PR wing who I'm going to really have as my consultants, my agency who's going to like really help me push through all the things I want to accomplish. But you really need to have a schedule of things that you are launching or in multiple different locations where you're saying like if you're going to go launch in London after you do something in New York, and basically be able to kind of fill the calendar, because like you said, it's better to be on retainer for that
Mm-hmm.
reason, right? Because you want to like build that momentum with the press, with people getting familiar with your work, getting on, going to awards, being proposed for awards, all that stuff that ends up like just, creating a lot of traction. I think the question a lot of people always have is also like, does PR typically equate to sales? We've talked about this,
Mm-hmm.
offline, and for me, it did seem to equate to sales, but it was hard to tell because there was just so much kind of going on at the time that I couldn't really make a direct relationship. It was like if I had started at 0 sales and then I got PR and then we had like a tremendous sales, then I could like
Mm-hmm.
pinpoint it. But when we started, there was already traction going on. So, you know, should people think about that, or do they need to make that equation, or do you say, you know what, that's not really what we're trying to accomplish, but but you hope that sales do generate from the press, or how do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, I think there is no satisfying metric for what we do. There's,
Yeah.
UVM and other things, but they're
What's
meaningless
UVM?
numbers.
What's
It's like, basically impressions.
Okay.
The numbers are kind of meaningless. I always think of it as like, are we talking to people we want to talk to? Are we in are we getting stories from outlets that we want to connect with? Are they meaningful stories? And then also one thing that we've started doing organically is that we also bring a lot of designers into the events that we put on, because we
Mhm.
want it to be as full of a world as possible. And, we feel like we don't take something on unless we really believe in it, and, we see the potential of it. And, ideally then, in each case, we think if we make people see what we see, they'll love it too. And that can apply to press, that can apply to sales. And so we're quite proud to kind of use our larger network and bring those people together. And so when we do dinners, it's 50-50 ideally between media and design firms. And so that's one way that I think is more tangible, which people appreciate, but there is no metric to that. And then, of course,
Right.
we're left up to the kind of tracking of the company themselves. If they're an e-commerce company, they have a little bit more control because you can see where the referrals are coming from on the back end. But other than that, we don't ask. And honestly, it hasn't really been asked of us. I think that we're fortunate in that way that we do deliver and we go the extra mile. And so there hasn't really been a challenge in terms of the results.
Good for
Alyssa.
you. Congratulations.
No, I mean,
Thank you.
when we were full on, it was just like, the exposure itself obviously brings more eyeballs. All you're trying to do essentially is bring more and more attention to your studio. And so, I think that can naturally lead to that. And I think you have to give it a lot of time, right? You have to give it a little bit of time for that momentum to pick up, because I think that some people might feel like, oh, let me get PR right away. And then if I don't see results right away, like, oh, I don't know if it's worth it. I mean, Rebecca, like, in all honesty, can a studio in today's environment really thrive without PR? Because I've thought about this a lot, and unless you already have a brand built, like, I find it almost impossible. Like, for me, when I give advice, I'm like, if you don't have PR, you're not going to get in the magazines. The writers don't seem to really, like, you can develop a relationship with writers, but I have found now outside of the PR cycle that they really want it to come from a PR agent. I'm not sure why. You may feel differently, but it's almost as if the writers are like, they're on their computers, writing about things, that are scoping things out, but they're really being fed from the PR agencies. And really, they're not doing as much of the work of like going to shows as much and really finding their, and you may disagree with this, but this is how I see it. Like, they're really, really just kind of being fed from PR agencies. What are your thoughts about that? Because
Well, I think everyone wants to work with someone who speaks their language, right? So I think that functionally we know how to talk to the media. We know what they want when they want it, how to package the press kit, if you will. And I think that they appreciate that we are reading their magazine each month or listening and all the things. But having said that, they really do want to know the artist, the creator, the designer. They really want to believe in them. They really want to, fall in love with them, in my opinion. And I don't think there's any substitute for that. And I do think that it's a business marriage to have, the creator and then the PR that knows how and when to, kind of work with the cycles that's created by the journalists. So I think it really varies, but it is hard to work without PR, I could imagine, because you have to do something. And, if you're not working with someone in a professional way, then it has to come from within. It has to be organized where, you're creating enough happenings, you're out there, it's seen as like, that you're also so of the scene or whatever that they're bumping into you. Like, there has to be a way to stay top of mind, I think. And so what we do is like create a system for never losing sight of that. And, and it's a lot. And, to your earlier point, it's definitely a lot for some companies to sustain that in the long term. And people do take breaks. And I can understand, I've seen all sides of it because I've worked with so many different people and personalities over time. And I think that there's a time and a place for everything. But if you're building the business, there is really not much choice in terms of figuring out a way to create a sense of momentum, because people become attracted to the momentum. And and then when the momentum isn't there anymore, there's either someone else that has momentum, or people are always kind of like looking. They're looking around. I think that, you can find a way to control it and make it yours. But it is hard not to do something.
Yeah. I mean, a question that I have sort of off of that is it does feel like, well, what happens? Like, a question I have is like, what happens when more and more people have PR and that, um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like the opportunities for, coverage, I would say are not maybe are not increasing that much. So then you have more competition for, features or write-ups. And what's kind of your perspective on that? Like, do you, from my perspective, I feel like I see more and more people investing in PR, but then does it become less valuable of an investment for everyone?
I
Mm.
understand what you mean. I think if you think about it, like all companies, or not all companies, but most companies have a marketing director. And it's a similar function where, you kind of have to do that because you need someone that does that sort of work. The same way you also need to have someone who does the financial work or other things. There's many aspects to running and building the business. And so I don't know that it's avoidable, but I think also the big question, and the question that we think about, is what is PR becoming? And that's why, one solution that we think it makes sense is like to look holistically at the way the brand exists in the world. And, what the work that we're doing is under the name PR because people understand that name. But a lot of it comes back to strategy and business consulting and brand
Mm.
consulting. And there's so much more than that goes into it. And I think that the beauty of the PR mindset, having known a lot of PR people inside and outside of our company, there's many talented people out there. And I think what they do well is that they watch the market and they know,
Mm.
where to be and when. And, you do want to have someone like that on your team. And the trick is to figure out ways to do it where you're not spending more than you're earning. You're both in terms of money and energy. And also, you're doing something that feels authentic to you. Ideally, it reflects the actual vision of the product, whatever the product is, the art, the interior, whatever. It could be clothing, could be food, it could be anything. It should be an extension of that act of creation. And then there is your truth. There is the honesty. That's the differentiator. That's what separates you. That's your legacy. And so I think any good plan comes from the soul of the origin. And that's why we really like to jive with certain people that we think are, ambitious because they big ideas and they want to bring something new to the world that doesn't exist. And like that's really exciting. And, then you can think about other ways to do it that's beyond even only press alone. But the press memorializes the event, the storytelling you do, even like the photography, everything else, any way you can imagine it happening. But that's to that point, that's why we've started to think a little bit more in 360. And the beauty of it is because the world is changing so much, we're also being allowed to think more in 360, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it really made sense to me when we chatted, before this podcast that you said something like you see press as almost being um like the final step of whatever is being covered, whether that is an event, whether it's a new collection, a new project. It's like PR is like the the
Hmm.
final part of this very long process of figuring out what, has value in being covered. Um, and that sort of put it into a perspective for me that I feel like I hadn't thought of before, where I was, you get these articles, you get these write-ups, but it's interesting to actually more critically consider the substance of like what
Hmm.
is being covered. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then ideally, there's also, you get more breadth to it. So there is that final moment, the launch moment. But ideally, there's multiple articles, there's articles in between. We can be more playful with some topics than others. Sometimes you can play with the actual personality and say, okay, well, where does this person travel? And, how can we go even layers deeper? What do they think is interesting? What are they wearing? Do we want to go that way, or is it only serious business stories, which is fine too? But we really like to look at the whole universe. And I'm really excited about the new media that's coming up now, Substack, even social accounts and other things, podcasts, of course, where you're able to show a human being in different forms because the traditional media, legacy media, I grew up with it. I respect it. I had the Vogue masthead on my wall as a child. Like I get it. But I think that, they have a very specific way of telling a story. And what I think is fascinating about where we're going is that it can be much more dynamic and made up and creative. And we're just at the beginning of that now.
I mean, so does that mean like, partially that, so legacy media is going through its moment of maybe in the decline. What are articles in some of these legacy media brands, are those articles still important? Like, is it still important to have something in AD, something in these Elle Decor, these traditional magazines? And are people reading those things, or is it shifting? Like, we have been talking last week a little bit about how there are new magazines that are doing much more interesting things, or just different things. So how important is it to like fight for those articles in the New York Times and like back in when we were doing it, it was like WSJ, New York Times, AD, those were the ones you wanted to, and then you wanted mentions in Surface and Design Milk, Design Boom, some of the digital ones. What does that landscape look like now?
Yeah, I would say AD still outperforms.
Still important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we love AD. They're also incredibly professional, and they have an audience that is unbeatable in many ways. And I think that, obviously they have that for a reason. Condé Nast is still beloved. Vogue is very important. Vogue also does a lot of great design coverage now. New York Times is the institution of America. So I'm always a big advocate for the New York Times because they're holding up journalism. And, I think that there's a lot of merit that they deserve, that they've earned. And also from the magazine side, they do digital, they do the actual newspaper portion of the design section still. And I think that there's no higher level of integrity than the New York Times in any category. And so I'm always a big fan of that. And, to your other point, Wall Street Journal, still immensely important, Elle Decor, immensely important. Like, these are the titles that are the ones that everybody knows. They're,
Right.
And interestingly, still the younger generation, it means something to them, even though they are a little bit more digitally native. I think that there's still prominence there. But, the market is definitely ripe for independent media. And so I look at, obviously, we are very close to Cultured magazine. The way that they're operating and the speed and the urgency that they communicate with is very on the pulse of where culture is, quite frankly. I look at Neptune Papers and the way that they have captured a different style of imagination. And I think that there's, this desire to kind of bridge these new gaps. Of course, The Grand Tourist being another one. Where they started as a podcast and then created a book, and Dan's brilliant. And so I think that there's room for everybody. And what's really fun is for, the creative people that we work with to find ways to work with the flavor of each outlet and ultimately figure out how you adapt to the character of all of them.
Going back to what Alyssa was saying earlier about more people in PR, more people having PR, how hard is it now to get those top-notch magazines to want to write about you? And what are some of the things, like when you see that they're interested in a story, what are some of the things that kind of interest them in taking on those stories or wanting to tell those stories of new people or something like that? Like, what are some of the things you're noticing that are capturing their attention?
Yeah, I think that the old rules of wanting something new always applies. So a fresh voice, a diverse voice, looking at even people in different countries. Sometimes you'll see there's a lot of interest in what Europe is doing. And I think it really comes to life when you start to see, to me, it's in the photography. And I think, the way that
Really? Wow.
the emotion is captured of anything. It could be any kind of product, any kind of interior. I think that the imagery is really important. And then, of course, like when we try to introduce the people, we really are a believer in like get to know the journalists. If you're the creative, you have to sit with them. You have to have lunch with them. You know, you have to stand out. You have to have a point of view. It's not necessarily where you came from. It's what you believe in and what you feel like you want to do to the world. And, you know, I think that there's a real opportunity now more than ever to answer the question of why. And,
What
I
do
mean, yeah,
ultimately,
it's interesting because even, you know, their goal as a, you know, as a media outlet, as a publication, is to get people to, you know, reshare stories, to get more hits, to get more likes on their, you know, the posts or the images that they're posting on Instagram. So it is, yeah, I never thought about that actually before of how you're pitching something that then they have to consider how that plays within their overall strategy, their traction, their numbers, their, yeah, their stats.
Mhm.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and they like a spectrum themselves. I mean, obviously they have heroes that they go to and they love working with them. They do look at people's accounts and consider, you know, how they're flowing, how much engagement there is. Will they reshare it? I mean, that's a factor that's an unavoidable factor of life at this point.
you
But
mean with it? Like the journalists will look at Instagram and say, "Oh, is this a viable
is this, yeah, does this
to
look,
get shared to get right?"
well,
Or
to some degree, and I think not in a disingenuous way, but is
right?
there a pulse here?
Gotcha.
You know, is it of the moment? Is it lively?
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
I think it's, you know, it's kind of unavoidable. Like, what's the point of view? I think they're
Right.
looking for the point of view, and then they work up and down the spectrum. So they have some people that have very big followings, and that serves, you know, certainly a purpose for them also in growing their own. But I don't think that they're motivated by that exclusively. The journalists that I know in design, I think the beauty of design and why we all love this community in this field is that it's more of a meritocracy than other fields.
That's totally
And
true.
I've now worked in, you know, bits and pieces in other fields enough to see the difference. And I think, you know, in this place, the people that come here really like to believe in what they're putting out into the world.
Is there a time where people get overexposure? Is there a time period where you would say, you know, we've been doing your PR for 5, 6, 7, 10 years. Uh, you've run the gamut. You're everywhere. Everyone knows everything you're doing all the time. Is there a moment where someone should think, oh yeah, I've been overexposed at this point? Because then you run the isn't there a potential like backlash to that a little bit? Not a backlash, but people being like, oh man, I've seen your stuff, although you're everywhere. Is there a moment where that can kind of start to affect your career?
I think what you need to do is make sure that it's always evolving. And, you know, people become icons because they've remained in the press for, you know, 10, 20 years or so. And I think those are the people that get documentaries.
Right.
And the reason that they get to that level is because they have always found a way to keep it interesting for themselves, which then really does come through organically. And I think that, you know, there isn't necessarily overexposure. I think there's an underutilization of new concepts and new creativity. And so what I would say, if
Underutilization of concepts. How do you
uh,
explain it a little more?
okay, of new concepts. So like if, you know, maybe the narrative should change in such a way where it's like, again, kind of coming back to the roots of like, what are we designing? What are we creating? What is the product at the end of the day? And I think that, you know, if the business and the launches that are, you know, being promoted for that business, if they are organic and flowing and thriving, then you're not going to have any sort of like backlash from the market in terms of
Right,
people
right.
feeling like it's inorganic.
I got
Um,
you. I got you.
And it's like, you know,
yeah.
Yeah,
I sort of
so
interpret it as like, you know, the strategies maybe that you guys employed, you know, 10 years ago in Fernando's career and maybe not the same ones that you would use today. because of, the place where his work is in the market, or, his audience and clients and things like that. Or maybe if you were doing the same thing, had the same strategies,
Oh,
people would
yeah,
be
it'd be
overwhelmed.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week when you were here. It was like, right, if I wanted to get back out on the PR cycle, like, I've gotta produce new work, it's gotta carry on partially, like, what I have built, but, kind of extend the narrative in a new direction, something fresh, something that feels new. We talked about, I mean, potentially new photography. That was something you're really dialing in on this, like, photography thing, and now that we're on the pod too, you're like, photography seems to be, and we've talked about this a lot, Alyssa, like, that needs to be the number one crucial thing, for things to feel fresh, it feels like.
Hmm.
It's like, and back when I was shooting, I mean, I shoot like a gallery does, white box with cement floor. That doesn't seem to be what's motivating, that what's like hot in the industry right now. It seems like you need to kind of like bring on photographers like William Laird seems to be a hot
Hmm.
photographer that can capture the moment, for interiors and things like that.
Or even like an
So
art director, who's someone
yeah,
who questions the styling and yeah.
right. I mean, so that seems to be, well, it's like I lost my track of thought here, but the thing is, it seems to be important to want to refresh yourself at all times if you're gonna do PR, essentially. Like you're gonna,
Yes. Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I think that's the key is that you don't have to worry about overexposure, but you do have to make sure you're keeping it interesting and keeping it lively and that you're putting a new idea into the market. And if you're putting new ideas, whatever that might be, whether it's a product line, collaboration, installation somewhere, there's a lot of different ways to express yourself. And as long as that life source is flowing, then you don't worry about overexposure because, you're bringing something or you're bringing people to something new.
in terms of collaborations and things like that, do you guys help connect people like within your network, right? Do you guys see the whole network and say, you know what, I think so and so would be great to collaborate with this other designer or the interior, do you guys make those connections for people and then merge them and try to come up with like, ways to kind of unite some of your clients like across the board to something you guys do?
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's another reason why we love hearing about what everyone's working on because then we can have a lot more depth of consulting there. And, we hear if someone's opening a space, for example, maybe they're looking for a designer. We've done model apartments with people. Or, maybe there's another space where they're looking to do an art show. We've also done art shows inside of buildings. And then we've worked with some designers on their product collaborations in general, whether they were existing and they just needed some advice or even creating where we go out and we're like, okay, if you wanted to do, whatever the product may be, furniture, rugs, window coverings, here's who we recommend that you talk to. And so we've kind of done all of these different things at this point. We've also worked on a lot of books. We've
Yeah.
published many books. At this, I think it's probably up to 7 or so. We've done
Awesome.
several
Yeah.
of them, and so that's another mechanism where you can both get the credit that you deserve for what you've created and your point of view, and then also have a different kind of news cycle that gets attached. And so, we look at all these things holistically, and we do like to kind of put the pieces together.
And from a kind of a fee perspective, in terms of, let's say, Fernando, let's say in a hypothetical situation, right? Fernando was back on retainer with you guys, and he was like, "I want to find um a fabric. I want to have a fabric collaboration. Let's say I want to
Yeah.
find a fabric company, and I have some ideas for patterns, whatever. Hypothetical
Textiles, yes, let's do it.
textiles. What would you then, like, on top of his existing retainer, come up with, like, an additional budget for for pitching that kind of project? Or would you consider that within the scope of, his retainer fee?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've typically, over the course of many years, we have just sort of done it as an experimentation. Increasingly, we're realizing that it is, its own business. There's also a whole tier of managers and other people that make these things happen. And so we've experimented a little bit with either doing just a collaborations retainer or having, some kind of commission that's added when new business and new revenue is brought in.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
One thing we've also talked about a lot, I think people might be surprised about this, but like you're a big advocate for dinners. Dinners seem to be a big part of PR these days. Why are dinners so effective, do you feel? And what should people kind of think about when they're kind of planning these things, or if they're wanting to do PR? Yeah, talk a little bit about how dinners are important in the industry.
Yeah. Dinners can also be a big stress point. So we've heard it all. And the cocktail party is not a bad option.
Okay.
But I think what the dinner does is that it creates a room of people that are ambassadors for your brand. And, there's really no other substitute for that, where you're getting the energy of the inner circle and you're getting, the Instagram to kind of capture both the spirit and then also ideally the imagination of a table that is set quite beautifully. And so we have really seen over the years, I think, our data shows that it does perform for people when it's done really well. I wouldn't do it for the sake of doing it, but I think that, if you're trying to create a sense of community, and I would say who isn't trying to create a sense of community, because I think ultimately that's how we're all marketing
Totally.
now. And I think that we have to have, we're all both motivated by and excited about, from a very real perspective of bringing people together that believe in us. It's very energizing. It's very, it propels the brand to another place. And the beauty of it is that, you can do it in such a way where, again, if the content is kind of baked in because it looks good enough, then you're seeing that amplification outside of the room. And I don't know that the cocktail events have the same kind of character. They don't look as good in photographs. It gets a little bit crowded. So there's a time and a place for everything. And oftentimes we'll actually go ahead and tell a company that they should do multiple events. So it's like, okay, maybe you have a cocktail party and a dinner, and it's celebrating this big investment that you have. Because again, if you've already built out the space, you've done the photographs, you might as well take it to the end and just get everything that you possibly can out of this exposure and experience.
I mean, for me, dinners make sense. So, like, if I wasn't in the design industry, I would have been in hospitality, and I actually I started a master's degree in food that I then dropped out of. But I think that there is so much meaning that comes out of well done dinners in terms of you're fostering like real conversations, real relationships between people that maybe see your brand or see you, from two different perspectives, and you bring them together and you force them to sit down for whatever it might be, an hour, 2 hours, and they're actually, next to someone that they're having that longer conversation with, versus I feel like when I think about a cocktail hour, it's like, oh, you're standing there with your glass, and maybe if you're there alone, you don't really quite know how to strike up a conversation. And I think that like psychologically, the experience that you have as a guest of those two different events is so different. And then maybe a month later are like, oh, I'm going to reconnect with this person that I met at Fernando's event or whatever it might be. And it just creates that like longer lasting, sense of community and like being a part of something meaningful.
Yeah, that's a really nice
Yeah.
point.
I know Alyssa's dying to ask you, so what can someone budget for a dinner? Because obviously it's outside of retainer because you're having to host the event. What's a good budget for someone to think about if they want to host a dinner that's proper, that you would say is like worthy?
I would say you're not going to get away with spending less than 20,000,
Okay.
and it can go up. It can
Yes.
go up to
Obviously.
40. It could go up higher. It also depends how many people you invite, but you have to imagine it'll be at least 20 because you're doing the food. Sometimes you have rentals, depends where you are. Oftentimes a design brand will want to change out the tables or, make
Hmm.
something that's a little bit more personalized. So you have to sometimes you have to rent forks. There's a lot of stuff
Right.
that adds up that people are not thinking of.
Yeah, totally.
And then there's photography, there's florals, there's a lot of things.
Would you say that like 20,000 plus like would include the PR on top of that, or is that just for the
That's just
like
the
that
event.
includes your service as a PR agency, or is that just for the tangible aspects of the dinner?
That's the dinner itself, and then the retainer is the retainer.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
that's
Yeah.
see, I
we
see.
also like we have the retainer model where we're always busy, and even if there's not like a launch that month, we're working on the next thing, and we really keep it very active. But that's kind of like the silent hum of having, again, to your point, like I think the full-time employee reference makes a lot of sense. In our case, it would be like you have depending on what you're spending, you're paying for one person, but you're getting multiple minds. And,
Right.
but there's really, endless value to that because we also, not only do we work really closely together in that team, but all the other teams that we have within our company, we're sharing information all day long. And so you're getting like the real power of that network for that fee and the insight and the outreach and the hands and all that. But ultimately
Uh,
the dinner is the dinner.
I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work. Any of these events, the what you guys do is just like it. It's the millions of tiny little emails that you have to keep track of. Keep track of the RSVPs, who's coming, what's tracking. Like all this stuff. It's a huge job. Like I think going back to the question of like, is it crucial to have PR as I just don't think, yeah, you can survive. You can't really stay top of mind in all the things you want to do without having a PR. And I think that goes for any company. It's, we're
Hmm.
looking at it as like designers, makers, right? But at any stage of any company, you need to have the right kind of marketing, the right kind of, public relations that are going to like, you know, put you to the fine, to the writers that are gonna get you out there. So,
Yeah.
it's
And
just
and also even the value of us telling you whether or not something's a good idea is
right.
worth it. And I think that's really the biggest underlying effect because otherwise you see when people make their own decisions, like everyone needs help. Everyone needs a sounding board. No one person can do any of this alone, including in our company that, I wouldn't want to do this alone. And I look at it all day and I think that that's really the value.
So if people were so you guys, you have a big firm at this stage. If you are getting started, is it like if someone has a 1 or 2 person PR team, which there are a lot. There are a lot of boutique firms that have 2 or 3 people really grinding. Is that Do you think that that's a good place to start if you're early on? It's just like, that kind of having at least some attention towards that, and then, as your brand grows to evolve to coming to Dada Goldberg or firms that have larger reach, larger capacity? Or how do you see that going? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it really varies.
Okay.
We've seen it all. I mean, of course, I've started as a firm that was 2 people. So
Right.
I know what every size looks like.
Yeah.
And the secret of our company is that we're big in terms of having mind share, but we actually work as a series of small teams. And so each small team is like its own little boutique that is threaded together by very experienced partners who know how to thread them together. And so we really do have the same level of care that comes with anything. And we look at projects of all sizes at this point. I mean, we're talking to one group where it would be a consulting project before it even becomes a PR project because they want to launch and they want to launch in the right way. So there's a time and a place for that. It depends, I think, with, what the budget is ultimately. And we're also really honest. We give opinions and we say, maybe you're not ready or we feel like there is something here. So I wouldn't rule anything out on either side for our side or someone else's. But I think that, there are a lot of really great firms out there for sure. And, we often give other people's names as well. If something's not a fit for us, we will, kind of give back that way and pass it on. But I think it's almost too black and white to say completely, because it depends on, honestly, it depends on the ambition more so than anything. I think that that's really where we are a match, is for ambition.
Very interesting, Rebecca. um, so where do you see this world going? Where do you see PR headed in the next in this next era? Post COVID, I think we're finally that has drained out of us a little bit. There's still some remaining, but I feel like that's gone. Yeah, and give us like a view of the landscape right now of PR and the industry as you see it.
And maybe also like beyond
Yeah,
PR, because I know you mentioned
sure.
at the beginning that,
Oh yeah.
you think about like, where society is heading in general. And, obviously as you have expanded your company and, the dinners, maybe that's something that's come up in the last few years as being important. But what do you think like society within the context of PR is going to need in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that all the rules will be rewritten on the macro level. Um, and I think that that will affect us all. I think the rules in terms of business and the rules of how you deal with human beings will always be the same. And I think, there's certain tenets of the way that we work, which is like, follow the culture, the way that we engage with people, the way that we want to excite people, all of that will remain. The tools and the tactics may be up or down at different times. Clearly,
Mm.
during COVID, it was more about social. Post COVID, it's more about dinners. It's more about events. In the world that we're going into, I think there's going to be this further disparity of, less of a climate for innovation. I project. I think there's going to be like less riskiness. I think we're entering a field in a world where I think you have to be a little bit more kind of careful with what you're spending money on, what you're experimenting with. And interestingly, what we're finding too is that 2025 has been such a year to live through in a lot of different ways, from starting from the tone of the fires to present. But I think that, what we're seeing from people that have longevity in business is that they're making longer term plans. And I think that you'll find out that, there's not going to be as much opportunity to sort of like try things. I think in the past, we lived through this era where a lot of people that had an idea that wanted to be creative, like couldn't go and start their own business. And they may still be able to do that, but I feel like my point is just that there may be fewer opportunities.
Is that
And,
because of the barrier of entry? Why
I
is
think the
that, do you
barrier
think?
of entry, with
Yeah.
the economy, we're gonna
Yeah.
see changes in the economy, and I think that you just have to be really well planned. And I think that the people that will succeed in the future are either really organized and they're putting themselves into groups of people that are kind of ready for anything. They're ambitious, they have great skills, they have the energy, or they're more singular voices that just can't be suppressed, and will go ahead and kind of find a way. I believe art always finds a way. And I think that, we're also at a moment of transition where there's going to be a little bit of a changing of the guard in terms of then, creating opportunities for new voices to come in, which
Say
is
more
just
about that.
life.
What do you mean? Like, what do you mean changing of the guard? You're saying like there's an era of people that might be cycling out while new blood is coming in? Is that what that means?
Well, I
Or
think that's what happens every couple of years. You see like that's fashion, right? That's
yeah.
just the way it goes. And I think that, there's always going to be an opportunity for someone with a point of view to step forward, always, in any capacity.
The thing is, right, when we look out the landscape of things, Alyssa's on the end of she's seeing all sorts of new stuff all the time. I'm, getting fed through Instagram mostly and, peers of peers. But I would say that there hasn't been a huge change in the guard lately. It seems like what's happened
Hmm.
is that the established players have cemented their position in the industry. And it's like you're saying, because of the barrier of entry, we're not seeing as many people coming into there are a ton of people in the market, but I just mean that the attention has kind of aggregated to, the people that have
To the top
to the
of,
top.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
wonder
that,
if the just had a call with a furniture designer just before this, and it just makes me think of something. I wonder if the I don't want to call it like level of ambition because that sounds a little bit negative, but I think that the desire, the types of businesses that people want to grow has changed. Like every time, the majority of times when I talk to young designers, their goal is to have creative freedom to sell, if it's a furniture that ranges between, let's say, 2.5 and 10,000, they want to sell 20 to 30 pieces a year and have their creative freedom. And I have actually, now thinking about it, like, I think never had a conversation with someone, with a young designer that was like, my goal is to become the next, like to grow to the scale of like an In Common With, or to grow a team of 20 people. Like it seems like everyone wants to grow these more like intimate businesses that they have more control over. But maybe
I think there's,
I'm just not
yeah,
talking to those people, or maybe sometimes those
Yeah,
people grow into those businesses without even like thinking
yeah,
consciously
that's
about it
true.
from the beginning.
it's both. I
Yeah.
think it's both. I think, yeah, I mean, I've seen both. I've seen all of that myself, and I think there's merit in all of it. But you do realize after a while, like what if you're really serious about running a business, you realize at a certain point, you have to raise the revenue to just even keep the lights on each year. Like the
Hmm.
rent is too damn high. And I think that that's just the reality of the situation. And so, some artists or makers like may not want that, but that's the economics of American life. And you know, but I think that there is room for everybody, and I think honestly, I think it comes back to the work. For me, it always comes back to the work. That's what that's what people remember.
That's totally true. Like I've seen people who have not been in the scene very much, or dabble with this and that, and then all of a sudden they launch a collection, and it's all of a sudden like boom, they're on the map. I'm thinking of this guy who I just saw, Patty Pike. You know Patty Pike's work.
I don't.
So Patty Pike been he's putting out work for years, and then he drops this massive collection, and he drops it with Studio 27. And they're like these highly polished stainless steel pieces, and I'm like, oh wait, holy crap! Like all of a sudden we have a real player in the game, right? And
Mhm.
it just took like the launch of this one thing to like put a lot more attention around him. And I think that's how it works. Like, and what you're talking about, like the design world is, it's not like the art world where you need to be networked properly. If you put out a good piece of work, like it'll instantly kind of be recognized in the design world. It's kind of amazing that that's even still possible, but it's very cool that that can happen. So I mean, I agree that it comes back to the work. That's what will always drive everything. And I think part of it too now is also photographing that work in an interesting way. And in fact, thinking about what you're saying, Patty had a very unique style of photography, or hired someone that did a really nice job for these pieces. Um, Although at
Yeah.
one point I was like confused if they were real or if they were rendered, which is like because they were just like they're kind of mind boggling to see. So I was like, I don't know if that's real or rendered, but that seems to be a thing. So anyway,
Yeah. But I think too, there's a lot of businesses like In Common With and Quarters we work with, and we
yeah,
love them. And I think that they bring a lot of soul to what they do, but they're an example to me of someone that has professionalized, but they haven't lost their heart. And I
mm,
think that that's possible too. And I do understand the mindset of, the idealism around like wanting to do something and keep it very precious. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's also nothing wrong with a little bit of scale where you have the potential to kind of change people's worldview more. By meeting more people and having more of a platform, you can actually say and do and change and influence things in a vast way. And I think that that's aspirational. I think that's great because, knowing them, Nick and Felicia are very excited about craft. And if they could and they had, a huge, bank with millions of dollars, they would go and they would save factories and they would save artisans. And like those are the people that you want to succeed. And and I think that, with the projects that we take on for what we try to put out in the world, I do think a lot about the idea of voting with your dollars. And, we want people to ultimately be informed about either a person or a brand that is worth investing in. And, so I think that there's other ways to look at it than.
Do you guys also, as a firm, offer like business strategy services? Because I feel like a lot of that like moment of scale is something that a lot of studios struggle with. And it's one of I really admire Fernando and the way that he's built his business and like hearing his story. But I have also heard a lot of nightmare stories of people who never are able to like figure out their cash flow and just really struggle with that moment of growth. And is that something that you guys also support your clients with in some capacity?
It's a great question. We typically focus on brand, and we think about bringing more money in, but then we don't look at the management of that money. There's people like Ashley Hildreth, if you know her, and I have another friend, Ali Moran, who does a lot of work with different designers, where she's actually looking at at their accounting and how they're kind of even spending and things like that. So I think there's people that specialize in some of those elements, but it's definitely needed. And we've seen so many businesses across many years now where you realize that what keeps them going is the internal structure. And that's how you make it long term. And so it's not just about being known, it's about managing the work. And, ultimately, like, that's what creates real longevity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, come on, we have to be, yeah. They're definitely not gonna like be in there and being like, hey, can you how's your cash flow going? Are you managing
For
your
sure.
system?
Yeah.
Although,
But I just think it's so, if it's a conversation that Fernando and we do have about, other studios, and particularly like maybe in moments where we see examples of like studios that get a lot of press, but then, we hear some rumors that, oh, they're actually struggling and, they had to like lay off their employees. And it's just that there's a disconnect between success on the outside and success underneath.
yeah,
And
under the
that is
hood.
often like, yeah,
Yeah.
misconstrued or misunderstood. And what I realized really quickly from, 2 years ago when I started having conversations about area with young makers is you really cannot, from a purely digital perspective, understand how someone's business is doing. And I had this moment because I remember talking to one designer who she had like 1,200 followers on Instagram, something like that, if we take that as a metric of, success somehow. And she was full time. She was doing amazing. She had a list of clients that, came to her regularly for her work. Um, and then sometimes I would talk to people that had, 5-digit followings and were not at all close to a place that she was financially behind the scenes. And I just think that that's like something that I mentioned to people that's like really important to to just keep in mind. And I think there's a quote that I love just in my personal life, which is like, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides.
Mhm.
And that you often just like don't really know what's actually happening.
Well, that touches on something we didn't talk a lot about or at all, really, was like how important, Rebecca, do you feel Instagram is today still? And yeah, is it still a relevant thing to be investing in, to be thinking about, or is it kind of like on its way out?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said about the endless loop of Instagram, but if nothing else, even if you're not taking advantage of it properly, the fact that it basically has a text message service built in with DM is irreplaceable, in my opinion. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere for that reason. It's too much ingrained in daily habits and culture. And, frankly, I think that's also where we're getting all of our information, at least my peers.
Well, when you said you're using it improperly or not properly, so what do you mean? Like how are people using it improperly or how use it properly?
Well, I mean, like if say they're not even really posting consistently.
okay.
And they don't, they're just kind of passively watching. And, I think the opportunity for Instagram is to use it as an engagement tool. And you don't have to post every day if you're not the kind of person that would naturally. If you don't have something to say every day, you don't need to post every day. But, there is an art for also, I think also a lot of people sell themselves short in that process, and they think, oh, I don't know, it's not interesting or whatever. They're not being even kind of daring enough to put
Right.
themselves out there.
A
And
lot of
I would
people fear that
encourage,
their work will get ripped off if they show too much too. Things like
or
that
that.
happens.
Yeah.
That they'll get copied and it's but so do you think that putting money towards Instagram is still relevant as well? Do you guys recommend that your clients, when you're looking at their entire ecosystem, that you're putting money behind PR, but there should be some money put behind Instagram as well? Is that something that you guys are recommending?
Uh, Sometimes, but we typically put the money into the photo shoots. Again, here I go with
Okay.
photo shoots. But, I feel like you do need a lot of content on a regular basis. And so we've worked with, some designers where their goal is that they want to have a book. And say they're not on a radar initially to get a book. And they're like, that's how I want to be seen in the eyes of the world, the publishing community. And so then you have to have everything. You have to have the press component. You have to have the social component, because the publishers are looking at the following. They're using that to gauge how much you're going to sell. And so, there are some cases where you just have to kind of make it work. And then what we like to do is dig in on what are the content pillars, how can we show you as a person? Maybe you do a product collaboration if you're an interior designer. Maybe you do something with a gallery. Maybe you do something else where, it's kind of unexpected and you're able to show your point of view more. I think all ideas are rooted in problems. And so we really like to hear what the problems are. We like to get into like what's not working, what's going to stop you. And then ideally you design a solution around that. But I think it's impossible to ignore Instagram at this point. But you have to find a way to kind of make it your own. And that could either be by even handing it off to someone else completely if you really don't want to manage it and deal with it, which a lot of people do. But a lot of designers are very close to it and they can't separate themselves from it, which is fair. So what we do in some cases too is we'll do like a brand build, and we'll actually give people photography and graphics and kind of flip the way the page looks. And then it can exist like that for a while. And whether or not we continue it depends on their appetite and budget. Either it's, we could continue in perpetuity where we're doing content creation, or they just have a new look. And then if someone lands on it, it looks more professional. So it really varies. But I think if you do want to have that recognition, if you're someone where you're like, I want to be at the highest level of everything. I want to get the best clients. I want to have the best collectors. I want, if that's important to you, then you have to pull every lever.
It's important to everybody. That's what everybody wants. Yeah, that's the ideal, to have the top clients, the top this, the top prices, the top everything. Everybody wants to be at the top of everything. That way you can pay for the PR and the books and the dinners, so that you can really have a whole entire...
At the end of the day, I think it can feel disingenuous to say that, but I honestly think it's about choice. And I think that the more that you do and the more you put yourself out there, the more things are available to you.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of people that do this work that aren't necessarily doing it for the fame of it.
Right.
And I think they just realize that they sell more, they can have more team, maybe they can take a vacation where they can actually look away. There's certain lifestyle components that actually come with the growth as well. And, you do need to have like a certain level of recognition for it to also become magnanimous. And I think that's really what a lot of people are motivated by, is having something that isn't so much of a one-way conversation where, it could be I would say it becomes very addictive for people to work with press. And also this is why we love it, is that when the universe starts talking back to you, everything changes. And I think that's where the joy comes in. And sometimes it's a lot. And it's, it doesn't have to always be like that forever. But, once you experience that, There's something about that that's life changing.
No, it's addictive. It's a weird, sometimes I think it was nice to have that for a while, and then then as you step back, sometimes I feel like at the heart of a real maker or of anybody, right? You just want to be recognized for your work, right? And feeling like you have to pull all these levers for it to be seen, and then play the game so hard where you're constantly having to do all these things just so that you can, have a thriving business can it can be a little disenchanting, towards the original goal of which is just to be the best interior designer on the planet, where you have your boot, you're dealing with like 10 clients and you love them and everything, you know. So there's always this, this play back and forth, I think, of that, of like, damn, I got to do all this just to like survive, have my business thrive, because you're like, damn, I just want to be like in my studio making stuff. But, it's kind of like recognizing that if you want to play the game, like you're saying, in America these days, this is the game. This is the way it, yeah, there
Yeah.
are some rules in the United States. It's not as easy. It's easier in other places. The rules here are a little bit different, a little bit harder. They really push people.
Yeah,
So
I think here it's everything everywhere all at once. And I
exactly.
think in other places, either born with a pedigree or you're not. There's maybe
Right.
not as much opportunity to break in. Here it's more of a level playing field, and you have to run for your life. And
You
and I
do.
think you do.
You do.
You
I
do.
know.
And I
It's
think what
crazy.
you do is you just have to be as optimistic about that as you can. And I think
Yeah.
you have to pick a good team and pick good friends, and
Yeah.
not as people that, not in a way where it's forced, but like I think when you're coming into the world with a point of view and with true optimism and
Mm-hmm.
you are curious, I think that's really what it is. And I think people can tell. People can tell what your intentions are. And if you're really a curious person and you want to see it all, it's all available to you. But you have to let yourself into the room. If you can't sit back on that. And I think, I understand the artist mindset. I would naturally be very introverted myself. I get that mindset, a behind the scenes person. But on the other hand, you have to engage with life. You
No,
have
of
to take a
course.
risk. You have to expect that maybe someone even won't like what you said. You might look stupid sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just being alive. And I think life is too short to not fully try it all.
Mhm.
And that's what we like to encourage in people. And that's why we love ambitious people, because they're just putting it all on the line. And I really respect that, and I see it for what it is, and I want to meet it, and I want to carry it further. And we built a team of people that all are joined in that mindset. And, I've also been, again, from 0 to 40 or whatever we are now. Like, I've seen all those stages as well. Like, the management day to day will kill you if you let it. It will absolutely take you down. But you have to be motivated to see people, the people that you're working with, wherever they are, the people that you need to meet, the people that you have that you're seeing every day. You have to see them as human beings. You have to talk to them as human beings. You have to believe that they're well-intentioned and find a way to show them who you are. And, from that, you make progress. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing.
Wow.
And on that note,
That was beautiful. That was awesome. Yeah. And on that note,
I was mesmerized and inspired by what you were saying. It's
Oh, thank
totally, you
you.
were just pumping me up. I was
resonant.
feeling good. I was like feeling optimistic, feeling really.
Yeah.
um,
Life is, it's worth it.
Listen, Rebecca, I wish we could stay longer. This has been great. We've talked a lot about PR on the pod so far, and I'm just glad that you've been able to kind of like punctuate, what's going on in the industry, and kind of give people like a little bit of the behind the scenes as how it's working and some of the things to think about. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
on.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Alyssa, did you have any
No.
other I always feel like you always have a final.
I always at
No,
the end.
I know
I'm
you always
always
like.
am I?
But
I
we
do,
did cover a lot.
but I'm
You're
just
gonna leave
gonna
it.
keep them until the recordings.
Well, the conversation is definitely not ending. Maybe Aria will someday be repped by Dada Goldberg. And
I'm
maybe,
always here to give advice, no matter what.
thank you.
Yeah.
So listen, guys, if you want to check them out, what's the website right now? I know you just launched
Dada
a new
Goldberg.
DadaGoldberg.com. Check them out, Dada Goldberg. And obviously their Instagram handle is probably the same thing, Dada Goldberg, at Dada Goldberg.
Yep.
Check them out. They're the best. I stand behind that. I've seen in my time a lot of PR agencies, a lot of PR people. And what I always loved about Rebecca and Defna was that they're not the people trying to get the attention. A lot of PR people out there are doing it more for themselves. Just be wary of that. Rebecca and Defna are not. They're the behind the scenes. They really are there to push you forward and not themselves, which is something that I think I've seen a lot of since my tenure in the industry, and I just have always appreciated that about you guys, and just have such a special place for you guys and what you did for my career. I really feel like I really couldn't have accomplished what I did in my early time without you guys, and it's meant the world to me. And yeah, I love you guys, and just I love
We
what you
love
guys
you.
are doing. Yeah. Well, we're gonna work together again for sure. I just got to go make some new stuff and get ready to get on that PR horse again, and let's ride the wave again.
No,
But
text me anytime.
I'm
I'm
going
always
to.
here for advice.
No, I
Yeah.
know I'm finishing up some new works that hopefully will launch next year. So anyway, listen, thank you again. Thanks to Defna also for letting you come and share all your ideas with us. And
She's great. She's great. I would be lost without her.
yeah, you guys make a good partnership. I mean, it says a lot that you guys have had a partnership for this long. It means that you guys are strong, and that's kind of rare in this industry as well. So, all right, everybody, you know the drill. Comment, like, subscribe,
Leave a review.
leave us a review. We're always looking for good reviews, honestly. If you're going to say something bad, just don't say it at all. Say nice things, because we want the pod to grow and in a positive manner. We're doing this for to put good ideas out there. So anyway, like, comment, subscribe. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.